And welcome back to Cheche, the show where opinion counts. Thank you so much for your feedback. You're sending it in on 22422. I'll start by reading out some of your text messages to us. Morning, the topic is educative, but we should discourage factories that are using firewood as biofuel. That's from Esther in Nairobi. Kongo from Roiro, you say it is true, climate change is one of the biggest challenges facing the world. Kenyans have contributed to the degradation of the country, leading to human calamities. A good example is the current flooding in Narok and the destruction of the Mau. Another question coming in, please comment on the Mau ecosystem. And you go ahead to, I'll say, allege that various parcels of land were given away. Why have experts been quiet? Njoro River is a dying river. Egerton University apparently is doing some organizing around it, but you feel it's a public relations exercise. The settlers must be moved to save the ecosystem. I don't want to deal on the specifics of this text message, but there is a lot of concern always around the Mau and how much of it has been restored. All efforts, political efforts around it have been seen as purely that, just politicking. Let me start with you, George. What are your thoughts on conserving the Mau? Is there any research to show that we're actually doing better in rehabilitating it, in growing more trees, or not?
I think for the issue of Mau, I think UNEP actually is doing a lot of work in Mau. One of the sites that our delegates visited was in the Mau forest, where UNEP actually is giving the communities there argumentative livelihoods. Instead of depending too much on the forest, they're giving them different livelihoods that does not depend too much on the forest. Right. So I think there is some activities going forward to conserve the Mau, but I don't think they're enough. I think we need to do more. And what I like actually, the country to know that we cannot live without the Mau. The Mau actually is not ours. It feeds part of the River Nile. So the Mau benefits a lot of people within Africa, and we should conserve that.
Cheche, let me ask you, what do you think it's so difficult to answer this Mau question once and for all for Kenyans?
Politics. And corruption. You will notice that some population was removed in part of the Mau.
Right.
And then they left others. It's not even Mau. What about Mount Kenya? Why is Mount Kenya gone? They caught all the Maruok, all the camphor, they sold to industry. What's happened in Tanzania, what's happened in Congo? We finished ours, now we're importing. Trees that were there 150 years.
Gone.
But unfortunately, there is no rehabilitation. There is no planting back. Moi trying to do the tea. Now tea zone,
yes,
in order to seal off the forest.
Right.
But did it help?
No.
I think we have, apart from corruption, there's no political will. When some people are removed in Mau, in the newspaper today, people are making noise. True, we need, must we go to the forest? Must we go to the forest to survive?
It's quote-unquote free land.
That's the problem. That's the problem. Political goodwill, corruption.
Right. Salim, let's go back to the question of communities and adaptation. Give us global case studies. What are communities doing to be able to cope with climate change, given especially because in Kenya, a large number of our people are quote-unquote poor or live below the global poverty lines, and a large number of these, again, are farmers. So how has the rest of the world been coping, and what lessons can we learn?
That's a very good question, and I refer to the conference we've been talking about here in Kenya. This is the 9th such conference we've held in the last 10 years. We hold this every year. The previous ones were in Nepal, in Bangladesh, in Vietnam, in Tanzania. And what we do at these events is we bring people, as I said, several hundred people from all over the world to come and share from different countries. When we started 10 years ago, there were a very small number of such activities taking place at the community level in a few countries. Now there are hundreds, if not thousands of them all over the place. And as you quite rightly said, most of them are to do with farming. Farmers in every country, whether they farm rice or they farm maize or whatever it is, they are the ones that are dependent on the rains or dependent on the weather systems, which are changing and making it more difficult for them. But also in urban areas. You know, rains are affecting urbans. In Nairobi the other night we had a torrential rainfall and roads got cut off. We are seeing more and more of those in other cities. In Dhaka, in Bangladesh, where I come from, we have a similar problem with these erratic rainfalls, both for our farmers in the farmlands, but also in the urban areas as well. And one of the problems is, just to pick up on the previous conversation, is that to a large extent these ecosystems on which we had depended for so long, we have interfered in those as well. So, you know, part of it is us having interfered with the ecosystem, which has made it difficult for us to continue on the ecosystem to support us the way it used to. And then we add an overlay of human-induced climate change, which is making the entire climatic system and weather patterns even more erratic. So we have a two-pronged problem. One is a local problem where we've not been doing the right things. We need to stop doing bad things, and we need to start doing the right things. We're doing a few of them, but we're not doing enough of them. And then at the global level, we have to prevent this globally challenging problem from getting even worse. It's already got worse to some extent, but the real problem lies in the future. And if we don't prevent it now, then, you know, things will get out of hand, and it'll be very, very difficult for
Help me out here. Give me specifics of interventions that measures farmers can take to help them adapt to erratic rainfall, etc. Should we be changing what we are growing? And when we're growing it, should we be applying technology? What's the solution?
Well, technology is a big part of that, and particularly on adaptation. So the climate change problem has two parts to it. One is the emissions of the greenhouse gases that cause the problem, and you want to reduce those. We call that mitigation in our jargon. And then the other part, which is the one that concerns us most because it affects poor people, is the impacts of these erratic climatic events, and how do we help people cope with them, particularly farmers, as you pointed out. So the number of things. If you're in a drought-prone area, then obviously conservation of water becomes an issue. You need to preserve water, not waste it, and then there are many techniques of preserving water that can be applied and are being applied in many cases. Some of the field visits we went to were about water conservation. On the other hand, in countries like mine, and even in parts of Kenya, we just heard about the flood. Flooding is a problem. You have too much water and inundates the area. So again, better water management to ensure that, you know, the erosion doesn't occur, the floods, when they occur, there's enough catchment area for the water to be in. Farmers know what to do in terms of flooding. They can have flood-tolerant varieties of crops that can be grown rather than the traditional crops. So changing cropping patterns, having new technologies for, on the one hand, preserving water, on the other hand, protecting from flooding. And then in some parts of the world, not so much in Kenya, hurricanes and cyclones are big things in coastal areas that affect countries. Just a few weeks ago, we had one in the Pacific that affected. These are getting more intense and becoming more severe. And again, early warnings for people so that they know these are occurring and they can take action. So most of what we can do is be better at coping with the problem. We can't not have it rain. It's going to rain. We can't stop it raining. But we can be better prepared for when it does rain.
There was a project, international project, where countries that had more trees, and I think it was carbon something.
Yes, carbon sequestration.
Carbon exchange?
Yes, that countries will conserve trees, they will be paid by countries that don't have.
Right.
How did it work, and is it working? Are we, as Kenya, because we have more forests than maybe California, are we getting money from California for conservation?
There is a scheme under the UN Framework Convention called Reducing Emissions from Degradation and Deforestation, where, as you said, if you increase your forest cover, then the world should pay you because you are sequestering carbon and you're also preserving your environment. The scheme is working in different parts of the world. I'm not familiar enough with Kenya to know whether you've been able to get any real money from it, but globally it is functioning, as I understand it.
In Kenya, I don't think we got a lot of money from it. I know there is some funding that went to Mumias and Kenya Power based on that, and the reason why they did this is because at that point they were targeting big projects. For the little farmers who are growing trees, I know there were some few projects, but basically the carbon market has collapsed. If I may use that. So I don't think it's available there. It's available anymore, but there is the voluntary carbon trading, and those voluntary carbon trading usually focus on big groups.
And how does that work?
So is when if you sequester carbon, if you absorb carbon from the atmosphere, and let's say I do that, and you want to emit, then I can sell you what I have sequestered or taken from the atmosphere for you to emit that.
And that would be an intergovernmental agreement, or how does that work? Is that corporation?
It's a private.
It's a private one.
It's a market-driven system where the tree planters who are sequestering carbon for a certain amount of carbon to be put into the trees, there's a market for selling that. But as George says, unfortunately, the prices are not very high at the moment. If the prices go up, then a lot more people will be able to benefit from it. And one of the reasons why we need a global agreement is the only way to make the prices go up is to force an agreement that this must be done. So the policy from governments has to be, this has to happen. Then the market can solve it, can do it, but the prices have to come up, otherwise it's not viable.
When do you have punitive measures for those people who are ruining? Like, for instance, I understand China and Beijing, and cities like the ones who are calling with huge factories. Why can't we, the world, have punitive measures to punish those who are polluting the world?
That's a very good point. In fact, in the international negotiations, the poor countries, including Kenya and the African countries and what are generally called the least developed countries,
yes,
we have been asking for this, in fact, punitive measures. In the climate change jargon, it's called loss and damage. So compensation for the losses that we are having because of you, the rich people. They are the ones who caused the problem. We, the poor countries, are the ones who are suffering. You should give us some damages.
And not only that, apart from the polluting, they bring the whatever they produce for us to buy.
Exactly.
Right. But it definitely has something to do with the fact that we don't have a stronger voice in the United Nations where these decisions are being made, and I can imagine how quickly that would be vetoed. Perhaps a question for President Obama when he comes to Kenya. Let me come to you, George. So you've been seeing these projects. Anything that stood out for you as you toured the country and said, wow, this is something that should be replicated and works?
I think some of the exciting things that actually we are working with the ACT, the former PACT, is how can we encourage farmers to grow more of the drought-resistant crops. Since colonization, most of the traditional foods, we have seen them as a poor man's food, things like cassava, and they're very drought-resistant, and they have the potential of transforming the food situation in the country.
And very nutritious.
Yeah, and what I know within the Ministry of Agriculture, there is a draft policy trying to make sure that all the wheat flour being sold in Kenya, 10% of that is cassava flour. Other countries have done this. Brazil has done this. Nigeria is doing it at 20%. So that policy by itself has the capacity to transform the food situation. I have talked to Suresh Patel several times, the KEPSA climate change advisor, and the private sector is very, very interested in engaging farmers in growing cassava. So one of the things actually this conference is doing, which is a little bit unique, is looking at what is the role of private sector in creating climate resilience or creating markets for drought-resistant crops and such things. And I think the private sector is ready. And my belief is if you cannot make a profit on it, you won't grow it. And if we can provide a huge market for cassava, you'll see people in Western Kenya, the Ukambani region, and also Mombasa, producing a lot of this cassava, which is then incorporated.
There's got to be the green money incentive.
Yes.
What else would you say that we should be growing? What should we be moving away from? What should we start growing?
I think cassava is big, it's huge.
That's one.
And I think in Kenya we depend too much on corn or maize. And the dependence on corn, last year we had a huge maize disease in the Rift Valley, and that has the potential of really affecting our food security situation. So I think it's extremely important for farmers to do a lot of mixed farming. Go back to our traditional crops. They were very drought resistant and actually very nutritious. I think we should try to kind of marry the two and try to grow both the exotic or the new crops and also the old crops.
You tell me how you're going to convince culturally people to eat ugali from cassava. It happens in Rwanda, Congo, but in Kenya, tell those Mluyas and Mluyos that they eat cassava ugali. Don't touch it. It's very sticky. It's like it's unless of course you mix it. If the industry mixes them to make it palatable. Not many Kenyans are going to eat it.
To mix it.
Yeah, in fact, what we're doing is We are starting with the 10%, or the policy proposes 10%.
But it's not yet being done.
So at ACT, actually, we are doing a study and going to some restaurants and actually making chapati with the 10%. So when you come and buy the chapati, we ask you, do you want to participate in the research? And then your chapati will be free. And some people, when people say yes, we give them a chapati which is 100% wheat, and we lie to them, there is a 10% cassava. And they say, oh, yeah, that was very nice. Some of them, we tell them there is 10% cassava, and they eat the chapati. They say, oh, we didn't feel any difference. So I think the issue is not telling the consumer that this is cassava flour, just telling them this wheat or this flour is fortified with cassava product. And I think most people, there is a lot of research.
As a consumer, I'd like to defend the right to know. I want to know what it is I am cooking.
I think we will...
Lest my little family wonder what
exactly what you're giving them.
I think what's the best thing to do is just put on the flour label and say this wheat is fortified with cassava product.
Right.
But if you try it, I think you'll not complain. Brazil has been doing this at 30%. So Kenya, the proposed policy starts at 10%. Nigeria does this at 20%. And there have not been huge complaints from those two countries. I think they're doing all right. I think that itself has a lot of potential to transform our
So who is buying the cassava? You're growing?
Yes.
I can tell you I can go and take my whole week and plant cassava. Who will buy?
So it's the private sector, basically the millers.
The millers, right.
The policy has not been passed.
Not yet.
So it's not happening. But what we are doing, the research, is to inform the policy. Going back to what we do is try to have scientific backing for the policies that we are putting forward. So the policy is there in draft. So we are doing the research to confirm that Kenyans will accept these. If then they will, then we can inform the policy and the policy can be pushed forward.
Are small-scale farms still viable with the changing environment? I remember years back, even when private, like tea plantations would try, bring in some sort of mechanization, tell farmers to come together, let's amalgamate our farms, etc. Such resistance because, at the end of the day, we have been, sort of culturally programmed to believe that this little shamba, this is my wealth, and, this is what I'm going to pass on to my children. What should we be moving towards in terms of our farming practices? Is it time now, to come together under, bigger, sort of shambas? Is it time to apply technology and have more mechanized farming in order to cope with climate change?
Actually, for a long time, I thought the solution to the food situation in Kenya is actually combining these farms. But as I grow in knowledge and understanding, I think the system we have is one of the best systems. If we had maybe an acre, the small farms are not economical. And the reason for that is because they are extremely sustainable. We can have a family farming the 1 acre and feeding themselves. If you have the big farms, then you have to apply chemicals, grow some of these crops that grow fast, wheats and all that, which have serious soil degradation aspect. So if he's a farmer with a small-scale farm, he has goats, he has chicken, he has cows, so he has this kind of a complete cycle of nutrient recycling. Some of the things I like telling my colleagues is in Nairobi we are eating foods grown outside the country, and basically what that means is we are transferring the nutrients from our farms to Nairobi. So the sewer systems in Nairobi are very rich in nutrients. The biocides have a lot of nutrients. So basically we are transferring nutrients from the farms, bringing them to Nairobi. If we encourage these small-scale farmers and maybe provide them with the technologies that they need to improve their production, I think that is one of the most sustainable systems.
What is your view about GMOs?
Oh, we think you know how to drop the bomb just when you're about to go to commercials.
I think for me, nature does GMO all the time. So things like corn did not exist. It was a genetically modified crop by the native South Americans. So the issue of GMOs, there is no yes or no answer. I think we can discuss particular crops. But I would like to hear what Salim has on that.
I'm not against GMOs myself, because as George says, human beings have been altering nature all the time. The crops we grow and we eat now are the result of us having tampered with the previous systems. And the GMO is a new form of doing the same thing we've been doing for a long time. And so just doing it in a different form, in my view at least, is not going to be particularly harmful, although the people may not agree with that.
Is it the case that bees also do GMO? When a bee moves from one plant to another,
Yes.
and you
Yes.
see maize that was this color,
They're cross-fertilizing.
they change.
Yep, they're
And you see
cross-pollinating.
the maize now is a different color.
Yeah.
If I was the
as
chancellor
long
of a
as-
university, I would have given you an honorary degree.
And we're going to let Mutegi enjoy that as we take to commercials. Thank you for staying with us on Cheche. Remember, you can get in touch with us on 22422. Thank you so much for the messages coming in. I'll be reading them when we're back in a moment.